Right. So now we're all seated. Welcome back to the second panel of today. And before we start with the conversation, I would like to briefly introduce the speakers to you. So Sylvana van der Braak is a research journalist at Investico, a platform for research journalism in the Netherlands, based in the Netherlands, I think. But she also writes for the Groene Amsterdammer. You write on topics such as labor migration, exploitation, sex work, and human trafficking in the Netherlands and Europe. And you have a podcast that you co-host with Simone Peek. It's called Speurwerk. Yeah, and you have written books, or you co-authored a book that is called Uitgebuit, which means exploited in Dutch. And you've written another book, Suriname Free Word To, about freedom of expression in Suriname after the military coup in the 1980s. So welcome, Sylvana.
Thanks.
And Edwin, you are head of enforcement and research at the Dutch trade union organization FNV, and you mainly work on the transport and the logistics sector. Some people may know you from a radio interview on BBC 4 a few years ago when there were big shortages in the UK, and Edwin was interviewed about the great idea to have short stay visa for lorry drivers, and Edwin dared to swear on public broadcast in London on BBC 4.
Saying shit also, the trade union, that's not even swear, so.
So the point was made, and a lot of articles in English media followed after. And yeah, you in 2017, you received the National Trade Union Award from FNV Port Congress for combating abuses in the sectors that you work on. So welcome, Edwin, today.
Thank you.
So for this session, we will zoom in on in the Netherlands, and we will look at concrete issues and approaches in the Netherlands in the field of labor migration. We will really look at practical examples from the ground that our speakers have a lot of experience with. But we will also look at the role of companies in combating exploitation of labor migrants, but also look at the social inclusion of labor migrants in the Netherlands. So these are a few topics that we will address in this panel. So without further ado, Sylvana, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to look, kind of draw the context in the Netherlands. So you've done a lot of research. What were the sectors in the Netherlands that you encountered that used or employed labor migrants in the Netherlands specifically?
Well, the sectors that I looked, that I researched were quite large, I think. The main factor is that the labor migrants were employed via employment agencies in the Netherlands. And then I specifically looked at logistics, like distribution centers of supermarkets or clothing lines and stuff like that. And I researched exploitation of labor migrants on river cruises around Europe. So the work wasn't only in Europe, and the other sectors that I looked in were only based in the Netherlands. So they were employed via an employment agency, and they worked in the Netherlands, and they were living in the Netherlands while they were working there.
Yeah. Okay, Edwin, if you look across the Netherlands, what is the division between regions and sectors? What regions are there? Is there a difference? Are some regions employing more labor migrants? Are some sectors more represented in some regions than others? Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so labor migration is mostly close to where economic activities are. I have worked in the government, less labor migration, less industry anti-migrant. But the topic labor migration today is a bit like tsunami strategy to also see where that's needed to have. In your presentation, I think in the narrative you look at the south, we have labor migration towards people. So that's a type of labor migration where we do not need the rules like and mostly that part of the migration is in the statistics subject refer to. Then we have the labor migration, and when you the Eastern European member states joined the EU, the labor market opened, and then we saw three types of labor migration. Workers who established themselves in the Netherlands to be employed in the Netherlands, basically how most people with common sense how migration should work. Then we saw a type of workers failed in their own country or in other cheap labor country to impose them to the Netherlands. And we see the third category where workers are labeled as providing service for employers who move all of the and what we see the last 5 years explosively growing is the business models where companies recruit mostly companies from Eastern Europe, labor migrants outside the EU, to label them as workers inside the EU, but separate work in higher wage countries. And yeah, and to if you look at Brabant and Limburg, there is no regional labor market anymore. And there is no Dutch labor market. There is no EU labor market. The Netherlands is a global labor because in the EU, member states can decide themselves how many working permits they provide to third country nationals. And in some other sectors, we see that Poland, Lithuania, Latvia goes sky high in simply importing third country nationals, label them as worker in those countries, but they never work in those countries. Sometimes they even did not set a feet in those countries. They're simply used as tool, profit-making exploitation tool.
So we will discuss later on what that implies for the protection of their basic rights, those different constructions. But if we go back to the Netherlands, Sylvana, what were the issues you encountered among the people that you interviewed, labor migrants that you interviewed, and why do you think it has come so far that we are having those issues?
Well, the issues that I saw during the research, there were a lot of them, but I think that they are the foundation is that they rely on the employment agency for not only a job, but also for their housing and for instance, their health insurance, which means they are from a country, they don't know how the country that they work in works, they don't speak the language. They're also based outside of our society, so they are very isolated. So there's not a lot of information on how things should go, and they are also in a very dependent situation on the employment agency. So what we've noticed is that when these people are working via an employment agency and they are sick or they can't go to work because of some reason, they can get fired. And when they get fired, they lose not only their job, but also their health insurance and also their housing. So that means that they have two options. They either go back to the country that they came from, or they'd have to find a new job very quickly. And they stay in this loop of having not the basic human rights that we've decided on in the Netherlands. As for instance, I don't know if I'm going to talk about this later, but we also saw this during the pandemic, that these issues that are surrounding around labor migration in the Netherlands, it suddenly became way more visible, and also they magnified a lot. But these things were already happening. So when they are, for instance, living in a housing that the employment agency got them, they are paying a lot of money for a very small amount of living place. I mean, I spoke to people that pay about 400 euros for a caravan outside of a city, that they have to walk like 30 minutes to get to a supermarket, and they are dependent of the agency to get to their job. And they also share the housing that's really small, like 30 or 40 square meters, when I started the research, with 8 people in one caravan, and they pay 400 euro each for that. And during the crisis, we saw that this was suddenly became more visible because people were getting sick, people were staying in the same places, stuff like that. And also when you lose your job, when you get sick, because they can just fire you and hire someone else. And that's the point where you really need your health insurance, for instance, but you can't get that because you don't have it. I think that's the foundation of the problems, but there are way more issues.
And when they are, so when they're fired, then they end up in the welfare support system then of the Netherlands. I can imagine what happens then when they're fired.
Well, that's also, I think, a huge problem is that when labor migrants want to work in the Netherlands, you have to register to be able to work. But I think that one of the problems is that we still look at this kind of work as temporarily. So we'll only register them for like about 3 or 4 months. And if you want to stay in the Netherlands and work, then you have to register again at the municipality. But the municipality doesn't let labor migrants to be registered. So that means that you can't apply for, when you lose your job, it's really hard to get like bijstand, we call it, which is an income if you get sick and you get an amount of money to pay to live. It's really hard to access that. So there's not like the social system that we built for workers in the Netherlands to rely on. It's not available to these workers, even though that they are paying taxes and working a lot of hours and months and years in our country. And I think that the problem is that we let these people stay in these bad conditions of housing, because we think it's temporarily, or we don't let them be registered because it's temporarily. I've spoken to so many people that are not temporarily, like they're not seasonal workers. They're here for years and years. I've met people that have been working here for 10 years and still aren't able to get out of the situation, even though they're working.
But if they don't get benefits, what happens then to them?
Yeah, that's difficult. They have to find a new job. Or I've spoken to people who were living in their car for a couple of weeks, and those people were lucky because they had a car. There is an organization in the Netherlands that helps people get back to the country that they came from, but also people end up in the streets, and that's also what we saw during the pandemic, that a lot of people ended up in the streets, and again, because of the pandemic, vulnerable people in our society, like it magnifies, it becomes a bigger problem. All of a sudden, a lot of places and organizations start pulling, like saying, okay, this is a problem because we don't have places for these people. And also they are not, how do you say this? They can't access these places where you can go to when you are homeless. So that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and Edwin, you work for the FNV, Dutch trade union. Can you explain a bit what is being done by the Dutch authorities, by the Dutch government, but also provincial and local authorities to address these issues that we just discussed? And can you explain the role of FNV, the trade union, and the social dialogue in this?
Yeah. So I think if you take a helicopter perspective on this, because this topic goes basically all around. Is it a normative discussion? Is it a political discussion? Is it a discussion? Is it simply no issue because this is Europe? This is what we've chosen for. But had to first analyze the patient called a sick labor market. It's like, is it a normative discussion? Partly it is. Sometimes some parts of social dumping are perfectly legal. Then it's a normative discussion like, this is something we cannot accept. But in 95 or maybe 99 out of 100 cases we investigate, what these companies do is absolutely illegal. So this part of the European labor market is there's simply no rule of law. And that's, I think you had in your presentation, why are these labor laws not respected? Simply because all these employers get away with impunity. Impunity from the EU perspective, impunity from enforcement perspective. So it starts with diagnosing the patient and what does this patient needs. And if you then see that, if we compare the labor market with the patient who has structural diarrhea, and the prescription is a laxative, that's basically what's keep repeating in this Europe. Because the clear and existing rules should be enforced not by me or our trade union team. That's a crucial role of member states. And that's why we keep up the democratic society. And it are big words, but in the EU, we are always ready to raise our fingers against human rights breaches in China, or Poland does not apply the rule of law. My country, the Netherlands, does exactly the same. And we are not only talking about a non-enforcement of labor rights. What you see, in most cases, it's a fundamental breach of human rights.
Yeah. Did you see that there was a report published a few years ago by Emil Roemer and a whole team? It advised the government to take serious steps to prohibit this exploitation of labor migrants. What has been done by the government, for example, with this report and reports that you've been writing?
Yeah, too less. So the report, I think you can cut it up in two pieces. One of, we need better laws. Now, the union is always in favor of better regulation, but let's stay realistic. Let's first enforce the existing regulation, which is all member states are entitled to. So that's the double side of Roemer in the end. Not much happened. They see it as a symptom. Oh, there was a pandemic and now issues raised. All people starting to get infected by COVID. Oh, that might harm our supply chains. So now it starts to get an economic risk. Let's do a temporary medicine and hire somebody who writes the next report. Yes. But in our reality, so everything I say is not like anecdotally based on 3 workers' interviews, where the trade union investigates these migration routes and the migration of the migration, because that's really going on in the EU with hiring big numbers of third country nationals. Yeah. We first investigate the recruitment, so the home country, for example, the recruitment in Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, because these days, if you see a truck from Poland or Lithuania, there is no Lithuanian or Poland driver on the wheel. They're from Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all these countries. So we first investigate what are these workers promised? In which countries are they labeled, and in which countries do they effectively work? Now, you see that the recruitment starts with lying to these workers, and they lie so well that workers from Tajikistan simply pay 3, 4, 5,000 euros to even get a job in Lithuania. Can we imagine? In trucking, we have a fundamental shortage on drivers, and all market mechanism says there is a shortage on something, the price goes up. Not in road transport, because they go to Kyrgyzstan to find workers who even pay to get exploited.
Yeah, I want to talk more about the transport sector and the hiring of third country nationals later on. But can you explain a little bit how it works? You have the Dutch government, but then you also have provinces. What is the division of competences within a member states first, and then in this case the Netherlands, on how to address those issues? You have a government who can make laws, but you also have provinces who will have their own task forces and who are closer to the problems, close to the issues and the stakeholders involved. So what is that division in the Netherlands? How do you see that? Maybe Sylvana has experiences.
So the Netherlands is famous on having social dialogue, but this topic don't need more social dialogue. This topic needs law and order. And there the Dutch government fundamentally fails. And it's not anecdotally, even last week, we won a Supreme Court ruling against the public authorities, against a company in Brabant who exploited 500 drivers from all across the EU, labeled them as worker in Poland. However, they never set a feet in Poland. And the authorities were like, oh, no, difficult, we cannot enforce. And then can you imagine in the Netherlands that the Dutch Supreme Court slams the face of public authorities where the union puts the ball on the penalty strip, the union pointing, here's the ball, there's the goal, kick it in. And what they do, shoot it the other side. And that now even the Supreme Court rules in favor of a union. Can you imagine that our budget is spending on suing public authorities? Can you imagine? And that's not out of lottery, that keeps repeating. And what kind of signal to the Netherlands you give to labor migrants who work in the Netherlands? Oh, we have rumor and we have a minister doing statements, and there we even have a picture of somebody from the European Commission quotes about you, and they are not even helped on their simple things. So that's needed, law and order on the labor market. And if that's well balanced, only then we can have a normative discussion. Is this what we want or don't want?
Yeah, no, that's a very, very...
I'm always starting to preach here.
clear statement.
Yeah, I also think that one of the issues of this is that the laws that we have, they are not protected in a way. So there are a lot of companies that they may risk get a fine, but it's okay. Like they how do you say that? It pays off to try and see if you get away with it, because if you get a fine, and the chance that you get a fine is very low, then you've already earned that back. Like, it's okay.
Yes, I see. Yeah. Sylvana, let's zoom out a bit again and look a bit more to the European context. How does Netherlands do it compared to other EU member states? I don't know if you know that, otherwise maybe Edwin can add something to that. Yeah, how are labor migrants treated in other EU member states compared to the Netherlands?
I don't really, I only researched in the Netherlands. I do know that in Germany that they have also during the pandemic, that they try to protect laws of labor migrants in a different way, but I don't really know details about that.
Perhaps maybe Belgium, we're in Belgium.
Yeah, so to give you some context, so we are based in the Netherlands, but we operate from a team with Russian-speaking people, Romanian-speaking people, and our playground is not only the Netherlands, but basically in the meantime the whole world, because we need to research the whole world to show what illegal practices happens in right under our nose. So we also have quite a good insight on what happens in other member states. So generically, employers will simply do what they can do. And if we then zoom into Belgium, the country where we are, for road transport, in the Flanders area, the public authorities have only 6 people to enforce road transport legislation in Flanders. Only 6 people. The Netherlands have tons of people and more budget, but those 6 people know how to tackle these companies. They know how to protect workers. They know how to confiscate trucks. Even companies get into prosecution for human trafficking. So there you see that at least with minimum capacity, they have a high quality of enforcement, but also gives a clear signal to an industry. And what happens in this EU, what do these trucking companies do? Order their drivers, oh, go to the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, there is no enforcement. Can we imagine? And for example, in France, everybody also thinks the trade unions in France are really strong, but there is a low number of union density, but they make good analyses and are radical. Just like the French enforcement authorities. If you get fined in France, that's not profitable, like you said. In the Netherlands, they laugh for fines. Oh, we're happy to pay fines, no worries. But in France, they're not so happy because these fines are higher and also purely executed, because most things on the Dutch labor market is administrative law, and it takes up to 2 years if you even will pay a fine. In most other countries, it's simply criminal law, or fines are executed on the spot. But back to the Netherlands, the Dutch labor market is unbelievable liberal. Why do all these logistics companies, like why is there an H&M warehouse run by an American multinational GXO in the Netherlands? Yeah, because it's so simple. We have these temporary contracts. So these labor migrants are employed in the Netherlands. They have a BSM number, just like how it should be. But they only know 5 minutes before they walk in the warehouse if they even need to come work on that day. Can you imagine? And that's even legal in the Netherlands, those temporary contracts. So for these capital-driven investment logistics companies, because it's not more, they're not traditional logistics providers, it's capital behind it, stock market companies. Yeah, they think, oh, if we establish ourselves in Belgium, oh no, that's too expensive. Germany, you have minimum. Let's pick the Netherlands because we can contract 600 temporary workers and decide 5 minutes before if we even let them work today.
And these companies, are they advised by consultancy companies about those laws then? Or probably. But yeah, so there are differences between EU member states in how labor migrants are treated and the rules and laws that are enforced. But there are many differences between labor migrants, and I would like to talk a little bit more about labor migrants that cross borders across the EU. Of course, you work in the logistics transport sector, and you did some research on labor migrants working on a cruise ship. So how does it work when you're a labor migrant working on a cruise ship, and you get sick in one country and you want to go to the doctor in another country 2 days after, and what happens?
What we saw during our research in the river cruise branch was that first, the people that were working on these ships were from Eastern Europe, and then when we were reaching, we saw that people came from Philippines and Indonesia and from North Africa. And what happens, I think I heard it earlier today, is that these companies that have these ships, these cruise ships, they shop through the regulations in Europe. So they pick the country that is most, is the best for them, like that brings the most convenience to them for social security. That would be Luxembourg or Switzerland. They pick that. They start a company, they find it there. Just the same thing as different, like the wage or stuff like that. And this way they can always make it best for them. And in the end, for the employer and the employees, it means that they have no rights or the lowest rights that they could have when they are working there.
Yeah, and Edwin, you work in the transport sector. It's the same. Workers move across borders. Do you also see this shopping around from those companies? Does it mean that those migrants or those workers are more prone to exploitation in the transport sector?
Yeah, exact. So if you are employed in member state A and work in member state B and C and don't even speak English or German or French, what position do you have to even rattle the cage on I need help? So that's why these companies not only move around with consultant companies like where can we as cheap as possible employ them, but even where can we find the most vulnerable people around the world are even willing to get paid to get exploited. So and then back to the normative discussion, because I really want to stretch over and over again what you said, shop around for cheap labor. Until a certain level, social dumping is legal. That's Europe to a certain level. But all cases, if you legally analyze them, all illegal. Yeah. Because what these companies do, the modus operandi is they do not only cheat on one element, their whole business case is built on, in road transport, it's 4 or 5 pillars. You have driving, resting time, social security, salary, transport regulation. All these companies cheat on all those elements. And from the enforcement perspective, if you cook a meal, I love fishing and cooking meals, so that's also always my point of reference. If an employer cooks a meal, so we have decent employers who cook a decent meal. These employers do not need laws or regulation. They have common sense. I have a business case and I only want to run the business case with treating my employees fair. So that's not the category we talk about. And that's in the EU still the majority, but that majority is pushed out of the market by the companies who cook those dirty meals. And if you eat a meal and it stinks, and you want to prevent that the cook harms it again, you see what kind of ingredients, what went wrong here. But the enforcement authorities all across Europe, oh, this is a bad meal, but it's too complicated to analyze the ingredients, we cannot help. But if you then approach it like from a legal perspective of 3, 4, 5 pillars, it depends on the type of industry, there is always a clear enforceable regulation to tackle these business practices. And also on posting that I think you said, they post people in countries where they have never been. Yeah, let's be clear, from the legal perspective, that's not posting. That's absolutely illegal. So there we need to balance normative discussion, a legal discussion.
Yeah. So I would.
Yeah, I think we saw this as well. Like what you said, to a certain amount, it's legal because they are shopping through the regulations, but also when we were on the cruise, for instance, I was on one cruise interviewing a lot of employees there. They were a certain amount working in the Netherlands. We were traveling through the Netherlands and Germany and Belgium. When I was calculating the amount of hours that the people work, were about 11 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week for months, after like maybe 1 or 2 days off in 1 month. Yes, that's illegal in the Netherlands. We have an amount of hours that you can work there. Also, when I was calculating the amount of hours that they work and the salary that they got paid, in the most convenient ways, they got paid €3 an hour. That's illegal. Their passport was taken away, so they weren't free to leave the boat. They were from the Philippines, so you have to have money to get back to your family. Like, those things are all illegal. But first, there has to be an inspection on the boat. People have to be free to speak about their conditions. And yes, if you get a fine in the Netherlands, then the boat crosses the border to Germany, and maybe there's no communication between the inspection of Germany and the Netherlands, so they can just move on, and there it goes. So yes, that's illegal. But I think the foundation of the rights of the employees there is already really bad, and not as we've discussed in the Netherlands how it should be, but because they can shop all the best regulations, it's already a really bad employership for these people that are working there.
Sylvana, can I ask you how you got on that cruise ship as a research journalist? Did you just got a ticket, and were you an undercover?
Yes, I got a ticket, and I went on as a tourist. As a journalist, that's not something that you would want to do. Like, of course, you don't want to be undercover, but in this way, I think this was the only way. We've spoken to a lot of people working on the boats, seen a lot of contracts through social media, and we were in Amsterdam at the harbor speaking to people, but we really wanted to see also with our own eyes what these people had to go through at their jobs. One thing was really important for me when I was interviewing people there was that the employees that I spoke to knew that I was a journalist. So everyone that I talked to on the boat did know that I was there researching their conditions, and that I was also taking care of their anonymity. Of course, that would be very, there was a lot at risk for these people, but they were very willing to speak, and also very happy that someone wanted to listen to them and actually told them that it was okay, that maybe they felt shitty in the situation. Yeah.
So labor exploitation is a bigger risk for workers working across borders, for example, in the transport sector. But then there is also a difference, for example, between EU migrant workers, for labor migrants from the EU and third countries. Can you explain it a bit, the difference, and why or whether those migrant workers from third countries are more prone to exploitation?
Yeah, so I think there is a variety of reasons. If we look to workers, for example, transport workers from Central Asia, that are mostly Russian-speaking countries, and those workers mostly only speak Russian. So they don't have access to, if they apply for a job in the EU, they don't have easy access to what is the landscape in Europe on what are my rights. And then they are promised, like, basically, some big employers do it. Like, you go on basically on a holiday business trip. You will earn €200 a day. You will see Paris, Barcelona, and even movies on YouTube. So stupid are these employers, so untouchable they feel that they even advocate on YouTube what they offer. So for us, it's really interesting. But so these workers think if you come from the middle of nowhere in Kyrgyzstan and you have 5 children, who you want to have to the university, you are not capable of doing that as stay farmer in Kyrgyzstan. So what these workers do, collect 4,000 or 5,000 euros in their relatives in their village to their tickets to a new future for their children. So there it starts, misleading. And that's also a key element of trafficking indication, and misleading. Then they are labeled as, they fly into Lithuania or Poland, that are hotspots. Then they sign employment contracts in a language they mostly even do not understand. Verbally, they're promised like, oh, you will get 200 euros a day. And from the moment they see, then they are minibused into the Netherlands or Belgium to pick up their trucks. And from then, it's a different world. It's not sleeping in a hotel, no, being isolated in your truck for 3 months. Access to clear water. We thought this was a holiday business trip. Even no access to clear water in the EU. Can we imagine? That's the first need of workers in this century. So even before working a day, these workers are completely tied up socio-economically to their employer. They have debts at home. Home expects that they will send money, and there is no way out. And these employers know it. These trafficking routes are military disciplined, organized, where all players in this whole supply chain of exploitation are really well briefed. And for us, it's the best thing of the job to chase them and to get all the evidence of all individuals, how they participated in this trafficking. And then their dream to work in Europe ends into a nightmare. We have also growing groups of Filipino truck drivers. We are lucky they all speak English, so for their the access to information, it's even more simple. But if you then see that we interview these workers, and we never go overnights with conclusions. So mostly with individual workers, we have long-term relations. And sometimes it can take up to a year. We have a relation with a worker for a year already, and then he dares to rattle the cage like, help me, I like to speak with Dutch authorities to have a trafficking interview. And if you then see what these workers suffer, and for example, what they put on Facebook, like, oh, now I'm in Paris, simply to not deliver their families' concerns about how they are exploited in Europe. And these drivers work for IKEA, for Ahold, for the clothes you wear, the seats we sit on, the fruit we just ate, and it's all transported by these workers. And it's, if you then see the last thing in my preach, again to Dutch authorities, last year the Dutch authorities published the state of migration from the Department of Justice. And employers reported 197,000 truck drivers, so companies from abroad registered that amount of workers. And I think, Inka, what was the amount of third country nationals? 90,000? 97,000, and it's something we see already. You must be blind if you not see it. And then the report said, the authorities, we are really surprised by seeing these numbers. I think if you have from the statistic perspective, that right under your nose, we have a fundamental sick industry where the unions keep rattle the cage, even employers now and then, because we chase them, and not by nature, but because we force them to do their job. Can you imagine that not even in those statistics, and then when these workers ask for help, then the authority is not there. And then we as union, because the relations we build with these workers, need to change our jacket from being a union in being a life-saving NGO. Can you imagine that our workers in the field sometimes take workers to the supermarket because they didn't have a hot meal for 6 days. No food for 6 days. They only drink coffee. And those workers work for IKEA, the companies in the world with the best theoretical policy.
Yeah, we will discuss the role of companies in a bit. But before we do that, I would... so in 1992, the EU was launched. So we had the freedom of movement of workers, among other things. Then in 2004 and 2007, countries such as Poland, Romania, Bulgaria joined the EU. So how over the past 30 years, if this liberalization and this European integration kind of led to indirectly maybe to the exploitation of migrant workers, How has the EU been addressing those issues over the past 30 years?
None. Not with laxative, basically. We see when the European Labour Authority was announced, we had Juncker. Europe should not be a jungle for workers. We want to achieve a social market economy, which I also want. And I sound anti-EU. I really feel a European, but let's also be realistic about the failure of this project, that there is no interest of protecting workers. For example, when Germany introduced the minimum wage for road transport, the EU, the Commission, started an infringement procedure against Germany because this might negatively impact the free market. Can we imagine? And in the whole EU, there's not even one member state which delivers the enforcement they should do regarding EU directives. Did we ever saw the Commission starting infringement procedures against member states who did not do enough to protect workers against the capital? None. Last thing, Ursula von der Leyen 2 weeks ago about Ukraine. Ukraine must join the EU. They are part of us. They belong to us, to our value. Yeah, it's fine by me, but which EU value? Because the 30, 40, 50, 60, 80 or 200,000 Ukrainian truck drivers employed in the EU are now totally exploited, receive no help from this EU. So which European norms, standards we are speaking about?
Yeah, I think these are issues that we can address with the third panel, with the actual policymakers. So hopefully you will stay, Edwin. So I would like now to discuss a little bit more about the role of the companies on this topic. Sylvana, you also did some research within the depots of Ahold, so our biggest supermarket in the Netherlands, Albert Heijn. I can imagine you also asked Albert Heijn for a comment.
Yes.
What happened if you asked them about their role in the protection of the basic rights of the people that they employ?
Well, what I see when I talk to the companies that that we find these issues is that they always have a different company to point at, because the labor migrants that work there are working through an employment agency, so they are always in a position where they can say, "Oh, we didn't know about this. We're not employing them. It's the employment agency. We don't like this, and that's it." So there's, I think, a very easy way out, because there is a company in between. And what I also think is something that I hear a lot is that companies say things like, "Oh, but they keep coming back, so it must be okay," or "Oh, they get paid better. The conditions are better than the country that they are from." And yeah, I think that's funny because the reason a lot of times I also hear, "Okay, we can't find Dutch employers. We really want people, Dutch employers working here, but we can't find them. We can help it." But well, I'm a journalist, but I think that the reason is that we can find people for these jobs, but not for these working conditions. And the reason that they keep coming back is, like Edwin said, they are stuck. Like they don't have a different way out. And maybe you can't always see it. Like maybe they're not always literally like buying to the chair or something. They are stuck. So that's very important. And I don't think that companies take the responsibility in taking care of their employees. No.
So FNV wants those companies to take their responsibilities, and you've been looking at companies on top of the production chain, and I think there is a new system being developed for due diligence. So why has FNV chosen this approach, and how does it work exactly?
Yeah, so first of all, to briefly introduce the landscape. So from the trade union perspective in developing a medicine, we call these companies on the top of the supply chain the economic employers, because no matter which, maybe there are 10 steps in the supply chain, ultimately the warehouse workers in Veghel who are employed at some dodgy agency, work in a GXO warehouse, but practically work every day on GXM, H&M fashion. And yeah, it's not a coincidence. H&M, sorry, has nice and shiny policy to protect labor migrants and to prevent abuse and human rights. So basically, years and years ago, we started as a joke approaching several multinationals like, the trade union is here to help you to enforce your own policy. Because if we see what's in your supply chain, we don't even need to have a legal discussion because you made yourself responsible with this nice and shiny. Now, and then you get into the economy of sustainability. You see, it's a €1 billion industry. We have all kinds of consultancy and CSR Europe, and I say it again, shitloads initiative to only window dress. So we learned, like, okay, this is they're vulnerable here. And we as unions, which I think for trucking, our team has the best intelligence of the whole EU about what goes wrong in the industry, but also to remedy it. So what we built over the years in cooperation with several multinationals, who we not mention yet because it's too early, a road transport due diligence model. Because in the whole sustainability economy, everybody talks about due diligence. All these multinationals commit themselves to OECD and ILO guidelines, and it's all theoretically. But here the union has practical solutions, a 3-pillar approach. Implementing a policy, how should the workplace of a driver look like? Minimally, simply let these companies respect regulation. Secondly, how will we control it? In the whole sustainability economy, are companies who carry out these audits. So they write a letter to a transport supplier or somebody else. In 3 weeks, we're coming to control this, this, and this, and we like to have this ready. So what goes on? Everything is perfectly legal. The workers they speak to are perfectly happy. They say this is the best company of the world. Nothing's wrong. But we as union have a bottom-up methodology on how to reach these workers. And just like you going as client on a cruise ship, this is all, and here we go to fishing. Our job is how to catch the fish. And the fish are then the workers who we want to reach. So where can we fish for them? What kind of bait do we need? So we do not, to speak with workers, do not ask companies to have access to their property to interview workers. No, we found out, and which Sunday can we find them on which parking? If they speak Russian, now we employ Russian-speaking team members to communicate with them. We don't speak with them in union jackets. We speak them worker to worker. So we know more on these companies than these employers know themselves. So we offer these multinationals that we carry out the monitoring part. And we do not call it auditing because that's bankrupt, this sustainability approach. We call it bottom-up monitoring. And the third pillar, so we monitor the supply chains and report to multinationals or where the breaches in their supply chain starts. And that's really interesting. The first companies were shocked, basically what happened right under their nose and that they did not saw it before. And the third pillar is remedy. So not us as union should drag companies to court or drag enforcement authorities to court to control these companies. It should be the top of the economic employer taking its responsibility to remedy the issues for the companies who deliver their goods. And this, we established in November a road transport due diligence foundation because the work we do is not exclusively in the Netherlands, but we developed it with the International Transport Workers ITF, so it's a global trade union, and the International Food Workers IUF. So this is a 3-parties initiative, and we are now getting in the air with the foundation in transferring some of our field work into the RTDD foundation. And we think from a business case perspective, but we see it purely from a humanitarian perspective, we have a unique selling point because all these multinationals have troubles like hell in their supply chain. History has shown that none of them by themselves was managed to run. And here the union, we took our responsibility to establish a road transport due diligence foundation to provide the medicine.
Has there already been a company that has been subjected to this scrutiny and this plan?
Yeah, sure.
Yes?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, we're looking forward to see the results then. I would also, lastly, and concluding, I would like to briefly also talk about the social inclusion of labor migrants in the Dutch society, because that's not necessarily something that we can make legislation about maybe, but it's more about what is the relation between those migrant workers and the local community. What did you experience in your research? What is the integration like, and why is it important?
Yes. Well, I think it comes together with what I said earlier, that there is a huge taboo around these kind of workers, and also that we look at them as a temporary group in our society, which is not the case actually. And as I said before, during the pandemic, we saw how important this group it carries our entire economy. Like, it depends on these group of workers, and there are these kind of thoughts, not among everyone, but that they are not working hard, that they are causing noise, that they are drinking a lot. I'm just saying a couple of things. Well, I've been researching this group for a couple of years now, and what I can tell you is that they work extremely hard, and they have been put outside of our society, so you don't come across them that often. They are working in black boxes. They are not working in our stores. They're working in the distribution centers, in the logistics, in the transport, where we can see them, where we can see how hard they're working under conditions that we absolutely wouldn't accept. And also, they are living outside of our towns. They are living in horrible housing. I've been to a lot of them, and I can tell you that I've left multiple times with pain in my tummy because of the situations that they are in. That's a huge problem, because I think that I've seen a lot of people that suffer from mental problems because of the situation that they are in, and also would want to integrate and want to stay in the Netherlands, for example, and really work hard, but they can't get out of the system. And I think that's a huge problem. And I think it's good that also stuff like this, to raise awareness about that. Mm-hmm. And that when also, like, the companies they are responsible, but maybe suddenly the weather is really nice and we want to have a barbecue, and we want like that to be barbecues inside the supermarket, we have to be aware. Or when we order something online and we want it to be there the next day, and we don't like it, so we're going to send it back. We have to think about who's doing that for us, instead of leaving that out. I think that's very important.
Yeah. And Edwin, according to you, why is it so important to combat those stereotypes, also among a broader audience of Dutch people? And what are ways to combat those stereotypes and to facilitate the integration of labor migrants in Dutch society? What is your view on that?
No, I think our trade union view is that this is not 30, 50 shades of gray, if I recall, but it's like black or white. Because no matter where you come from, no matter where you're employed, workers should be treated equally. And what happened over the decades, that right-wing policy and even employers try to divide workers. It's them taking your jobs. It's not them taking your jobs. It's somebody who he becomes rich like to divide workers. So as union, we must have a clear approach agenda, and not only providing the medicine for supply chain solutions, which is the economic solution, but also for our own workers. And if you then, Gerrit, his example, we learned the trick by cleaning up the whole Western European potato transport supply chain, if that's good English. So we had 3 Dutch transport companies dominating the whole Western European market. They all had subsidiaries in Poland, employing drivers for 2-3 euros an hour, did exactly the same as the Dutch workers. And we as union thought we first must educate and collect the right arguments for our Dutch workers that these drivers are not the enemy, their own employer is the enemy. And then the case was escalated in the meeting on, I think it was a Sunday, Gerrit, where the CEO, a millionaire, came in one of those meetings, and the first thing he said, we understand your concerns as Dutch workers, because these Polish workers are, they take your jobs. And these workers said, oh, sorry, we don't hate our colleagues, we hate you for dividing us. And for us as trade union, and for me as trade union activist, let me call like this, it's fantastic if we manage to educate our workers that they stand up against the biggest chief in commander to say basically, you're the perpetrator. And that's basically on micro level how we as union fundamentally need to change this. So, and more needs to be done. I had to have some self-reflection on the union. A nice picture of a union leader with somebody from the European Commission will not remedy these issues. We need to be self-reflecting. Also, simply as unions, we need to step up harder against populism, dividing workers. As union, we are not against labor migration, even if they want to get workers from China. Come, if it's needed. But it's about how do we treat workers. That should be the fundament. And there we get back to the whole fundament of the union. How did we ever start it? Because it was bloody needed. And why, as unions, must we further develop to organize migrant workers? Because it's bloody needed.
Well, I would like to end our conversation on this uniting message on working camaraderie. So I would like to open the floor for Q&A and for questions if there are any. Are there any questions? There's a lot. Alvaro, I'm gonna give the mic to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this conversation. I would like to ask a similar question to the one that I asked Anita before about the integration, the transnational integration of trade unions. So to what extent, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So to what extent do you think it is possible to, or do you think it is necessary to build some sort of more transnational trade union rather than just a federation of national trade unions? Because I mean, a lot of the things that you're discussing, I think it's difficult to address without having a more integrated also labor organization, right? So yeah, thanks to both. Yeah, thanks.
Straight to this one. Yeah. So for my point of reference is road transport. So the unions are organized in a European, in the ETF, the European Road Transport Federation, the Global Trade Union Federation. If you ask me, it's even ridiculous inside the union that there is not EU coverage of membership. And so that's I think in the union the elephant in the house. I think we should get there, but you can have 10 years discussion on getting there, but we decided as FFA to simply start with unions from the host countries. For example, several years ago, we started a partnership with the Transport Workers Union in Lithuania. Why? Because we see all these workers in the Netherlands from Ukraine with Lithuanian employment contracts. So we thought, yeah, is it then smart as FFA that we will offer these people trade union support like we do? We are not even capable to. So we start strategic partnerships for those unions, factually organize these workers. And then on a helicopter perspective, we approach the monster. Because in my union, not everybody likes it. I don't care where a worker is organized. If he or she is organized, that will help. So we need to further develop also pragmatically, and that makes road transport an even more complicated project than many others, because in an H&M warehouse in the Netherlands, we have 6 nationalities, but at least they're all employed in the Netherlands, and we as FNV have infrastructure to organize them. And because we lack on the fundamental answer to self-reflection for the union, that's also why this topic went so far, simply because these employers managed to do so. And where we do these bilateral interactions, yeah, for us it's fantastic, because if we interview Lithuanian employed drivers somewhere in Western Europe, we do not start with, oh, what would your rights be in the Netherlands? Like 14 euros an hour. No, their point of reference, they're employed in Lithuania, so we first inform them about their rights in Lithuania. Now, then they see already that they're tremendously ripped off, even according Lithuanian law. Can you imagine? So their eyes are opening from the Lithuanian perspective. And if you then organize these workers, it's more effective to then further develop these case studies in dragging these Lithuanian companies to court in the Netherlands. We now have lined up several legal cases where we organized workers from Belarus, Ukraine, and Lithuania in the Lithuanian Union. But these cases will be legally executed in the Netherlands. And that's for us, for the trade union, nice bilateral playground, or what as union can we do? And that's also the fuel to inspire the rest of the trade union to act more international, because these days the trade union work does not stop at the border. Yeah, there it begins.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the audience? Otherwise, I would also like to ask my colleagues whether there are questions in the chat as well, because I can't see it. I will first give the floor then to Anita, and then maybe look at the questions.
Thank you. I have another question to Edwin. You were quite skeptical about the European Labour Authority. I was wondering, do you see a possibility that it could still play an important role, or what is your take on that?
Yeah, so I'm basically skeptical, based on experience, skeptical about most of those initiatives. And let's hope it will help. And I'm basically also in the stakeholder committee of the European Labour Authority, so I do all my best. But to remedy these issues, and we can have a labour authority to organize cross-border enforcement. But if even in how I call it, a civilized country as the Netherlands, who sees themselves mostly as best kid of the class, if even the Dutch authorities are not enforcing what they simply can do in the Netherlands, why should we put all those energy in? But let's first, back to the rule of law, let's first grab these member states to enforce. And in the end, the European Labour Authority is also only, they're not so powerful if a member state simply says, European Labour Committee, bye-bye, we don't like to work on enforcement, there are no tooth to bite these member states. And we know already that the Commission is also not in favor of bite these member states on their duty. And if we then make it really big, the item on refugees, we all agree in Europe to have refugees, but some member states simply say, that does not apply for us. And that even the EU does not dare to grab these member states on these issues. We know already that nobody would care about some truck drivers down the supply chain are exploited. Who would care? And I'm skeptical, but not skeptical about that we will solve it, because we will solve it in the end.
Thank you. What I also miss a bit in this conversation is road safety in some way, because I think if I hear that people work for 12 or 14 hours, or even on the ships, I can imagine that you're working with hygiene, all of this. This can also actually impact customers, so to say, or other people driving on the roads. So I don't know, and also maybe referring back to Ukraine, I think it's an interesting thing. Is it maybe that it's very cruel, but maybe we need political momentum as well, and this could be a major incident, let's hope not, but also a war. You've seen also that the migration influx in 2015 also created this public debate, so to say. So maybe a question to you, and it's maybe a prophecy maybe that I ask you to do, but what is, there's so much at stake, but do we need this major crisis to happen for us to realize as European societies that this is a major problem to solve? Or are we waiting for the long-term thing to?
Journalists are not allowed to give
I
their...
can't
but you would be the one covering this. So, I mean, Sylvana, we are counting on you there and your colleagues that you would be the one to unveil the story.
Exactly.
Mostly there are then other parties who hand their view to a journalist, and a journalist will do an independent source over his or more sources, and then it ends like...
Yeah. Well, what do you think? Because you have been doing amazing journalism, you have been doing amazing work within the union, but apparently that's not been enough. And also the hard work of your colleagues has not been enough to raise the issue enough for us to get into action, or policymakers to get into action.
That's why I'm so skeptical, because, for example, about road safety, I don't know how many of you regularly work 280 hours in a month and are bound in your workplace for 6 months and left the office, because that's the reality in road transport. These workers work 250 hours, do not leave their trucks for a single night in periods of many months. So the brains of in the Netherlands, I always say the plofkip. We had campaign on these chicken who were so close, and that's successfully banned. And the chicken have now more space to live, and we only eat this chicken. But do realize these chicken had more space than a truck driver has in 6 months. So the mental health of the drivers, keeping up the good show for at home, even suffering to have enough food. Yeah, what the impact of that on road safety is, it's simply these workers are driving and surviving. And it ends then in the newspaper, oh, a truck driver crashed. Yeah, like 3 weeks ago in Brabant, to make it to the south, a dead driver from Kyrgyzstan was found on an industry park in the water. So it was a little thing in the newspaper. Yeah, I thought, this could be our case. So one of our team went there, interviewed drivers. Yeah, it was this and this company. And then it was escalated, not because of us, but we traced in our database, what is our track record with this company? We had 2 drivers already being interviewed by Dutch public authorities on trafficking indications. These workers had no money, no status. The authorities said, yeah, really bad situation, but we do not see any indications of trafficking. Then the authority says to the union, yeah, union, not all cases are human trafficking. This needs to follow the administrative route, call the road enforcement authorities. So what we did with the next case of a Kyrgyzstan driver, spoken with him, agreed with him, this and this control. He spoke to the control authorities said, no, you tell that you live in your cabin half a year. It's also shown by your data, but it's not enough to harm your company. And what happened, the third driver, dead in the water. So that's basically the stories behind a simple driver dead in the water, who was on the dark industry zone where he was even not allowed to be, and no access to clear water, and he steps out of the wrong door of his truck, falls in the water, can't swim, get killed. And in this case, we are now representing the widow, and the employer said already to the family, oh, he was drunk, and you need to pay the repatriation of the body yourself. That's what all comes on top of this. And there we start as union, from union to basically NGO.
Yes. There are also employment agencies that do pay for the how do you say, when people die.
The funeral cost.
Yes, repatriation to the country. I think that I know a couple of employment agencies where that's part of the budget. Like people kill themselves even because of the mental situation that they're in, or kill their roommates. I've heard that a lot of times, multiple times. And also in the distribution centers, there's also situations where people get into accidents, lots of times actually, and also situations where they are not able to work anymore, or maybe for the rest of their lives. I've spoken to a man who has had, how do you say that, herseninfarct in English? I don't know.
Mild stroke?
A mild stroke?
And we had a driver who had it, so I know all these English prescriptions. Yes. We all had drivers with those symptoms and forced to drive again. So.
Oh, well, this man, he can't work for the rest of his life, but he was fired that week. And he had a huge problem. So I think, yes, there are a lot of safety issues, and not only for other people's, like also the captains of the cruises I went on. There are also a couple of accidents there because they've worked too many hours, but also for a lot of labor migrants that are working. Yes.
Are there a few questions on the chat or not? I cannot see it. No? Okay. We have time for a last question if there is any. Otherwise, we can wrap up. All right, then I really want to thank Edwin Atema and Sylvana van den Braak for your contribution. It was a fascinating conversation, so thank you very much.